Kale stood atop the cliffs overlooking a desolate wasteland, where the charred ruins of a once proud city sprawled beneath the stormy sky. The howling wind tugged at his jagged armor, each shard a remnant of his transformation. His crimson eyes, burning with fury and pain, scanned the destruction below. This was once his home, a place he had sworn to protect at all costs. Now, it was a haunting reminder of betrayal, a scar etched into the very land that mirrored the one carved into his soul. There was a time when Kale had been a noble warrior of the Legion of Light, a beacon of hope and strength for the realm of Solaris. Loyal to his comrades and guided by an unwavering belief in justice, Kale lived for his oath, to protect the innocent and uphold peace. His closest allies, Rorik, Merrick, Lauren, and Arion, were more than brothers in arms. They were his family. Together, they safeguarded the realm from countless threats, earning glory and respect. But loyalty, Kale learned, was a fragile bond when greed and ambition lurked in the shadows. It was Arion who had masterminded the betrayal, selling out the realm to invaders for promises of power. The others followed, their hands stained with Kale's blood, when they framed him for treason to protect their secret. Chained and stripped of his honor, Kale was cast into the abyss, a place whispered about in fearful tones. It was said to be a realm of torment, where the light of hope could not pierce the eternal darkness. Kale had descended into its endless void, consumed by anguish, rage, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. In the abyss, nightmares were given form, and pain was a constant companion. Shadows crept into Kale's mind, whispering doubts and feeding his despair. He had almost succumbed to the torment, his resolve shattered like glass under a crushing weight. But the abyss was not merely a prison. It was a crucible. Kale faced horrors that tested the limits of his endurance. One fateful night, he encountered a monstrous shadow beast, a twisted reflection of his own agony. The beast's claws tore into him, but Kale fought back, driven by a primal need to survive. In defeating it, Kale understood the truth. His pain and rage could either consume him or empower him. He chose the latter. Over time, he harnessed the energy of the abyss, forging himself anew. His shattered soul was reforged into a weapon of unyielding will, his armor crafted from shards of the darkness itself. Now, as Kale emerged from the abyss, he was no longer the man he once was. The fire of vengeance burned within him, fueling his every step. The traitors who had cast him into oblivion thought they had extinguished him, but they had only lit the spark of his transformation. Kale's voice was low and cold as he whispered into the storm, "You made this monster. Now, you will face it." With those words, he turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the remnants of the Legion awaited their reckoning. The city of Blackspire trembled under the weight of Kale's wrath. His jagged, shadow-forged figure moved through the streets like a living storm, each step echoing with the cries of those who dared to oppose him. Rorik, the commander who once called Kale his brother, now ruled over the city, a fortress of greed built on the betrayal of the realm. Kale's approach was relentless, his presence a harbinger of doom. The guards who stood in his path were struck down with ease, their weapons shattering against his unyielding armor. To the people of Blackspire, he was no longer a man but a force of nature, an embodiment of vengeance. Kale burst into the commander's hall, where Rorik sat surrounded by his remaining guards. The man's face turned pale as he recognized the figure before him, the warrior he had betrayed and left for dead. "Kale, it wasn't my choice," Rorik stammered, his voice trembling. "Arion forced my hand. I had no choice." But Kale's gaze was unflinching, his voice like steel. "You forged this monster with your own hands. Now you will face the consequences." The battle that followed was swift and brutal. Rorik's pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears as Kale delivered judgment. The commander's final scream echoed through the hall, a warning to the other traitors who awaited their turn. News of Rorik's demise traveled quickly, reaching the ears of Merrick, Lauren, and Arion. Merrick, the tactician who had orchestrated much of the betrayal, dismissed Kale's actions as nothing more than the desperate revenge of a broken man. Confident in his fortified stronghold, Merrick ordered his mercenaries to prepare for war. Lauren, the spy master, grew paranoid, sending assassins to hunt Kale before he could strike again. As for Arion, the mastermind, he remained calm, seeing Kale's rise as an opportunity to test the strength of his own dominion. Kale's march to Marik's stronghold was marked by destruction. Along the way, he encountered remnants of the Legion, now reduced to mercenaries loyal to Merrick. They tried to halt his advance, but their efforts were futile. Kale spared those who surrendered, but his fury crushed those who stood in his path. Stories of the Abyss-Forged Avenger spread like wildfire, and the people began to see him not as a monster, but as a harbinger of justice. When Kale finally reached Marik's fortress, the battle was inevitable. Merrick, ever the tactician, had prepared for Kale's arrival, setting traps and deploying his forces strategically. But Merrick had underestimated the sheer power of Kale's unrelenting will. The walls of the fortress crumbled under Kale's assault, and Merrick found himself cornered in the Great Hall. Their confrontation was a clash of strength and strategy, but in the end, Kale's Abyss-Forged might proved overwhelming. As Merrick fell, Kale's legend grew, and fear tightened its grip on the remaining traitors. Lauren's hidden lair was a maze of shadows and illusions, designed to confuse and disorient any who dared enter. But for Kale, whose senses had been sharpened in the abyss, the spy master's tricks were nothing more than a fleeting nuisance. He moved through the labyrinth with purpose, his steps echoing like the toll of a death knell. Lauren, who had once orchestrated Kale's downfall with cunning deceit, now cowered in fear as the shadow-forged warrior closed in. When Kale finally confronted him, Lauren tried to reason with him. "I only followed orders, Kale. Arion made me do it," he cried, his voice trembling with desperation. But Kale's expression remained cold, unyielding. "Forgiveness," he said, his voice a low growl, "died with the man you betrayed." With a single, decisive blow, Kale silenced the spy master, his body crumpling to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. The path to Arion was now clear. The self-proclaimed king of the realm ruled from the capital, a shining city built on lies and blood. As Kale approached, the city's defenders faltered. Stories of his wrath had reached their ears, and many abandoned their posts rather than face the Abyss-Forged Avenger. By the time Kale entered the throne room, only Arion remained, seated on his gilded throne. Arion greeted Kale with a smirk, his arrogance undiminished. "So, you've come at last," he said, his voice dripping with false bravado. "Do you even understand why I did it? The realm needed strength, not blind loyalty. Your ideals were a weakness I couldn't afford." Kale stepped forward, his shadowed armor glinting in the dim light. "Your strength was built on betrayal," he replied, his voice cold. "And betrayal always demands a reckoning." The battle that followed was fierce, a clash of titanic wills. Arion, a skilled warrior in his own right, fought with the desperation of a man who knew his time was running out. But Kale's unrelenting power, forged in the crucible of the abyss, proved too much. As Arion fell to his knees defeated, Kale stood over him, his voice echoing like thunder. "This is not vengeance," he said. "This is justice." When the battle was over, Kale surveyed the ruins of Arion's empire. The man he had once been was gone, replaced by something stronger, something unbreakable. As he turned and walked away, his shadow stretching long behind him, Kale disappeared into the horizon, a legend whispered among men, a symbol of vengeance and justice.